Okay, so today we're discussing 7 and 8 string guitars, extended range guitars, and whether they're necessary or if they're right for you. Alright, so I just gotta say, jumping into this, I'm not sponsored, I'm not famous. No one's giving me money to say this. You know, I'm not sponsored by Solar or Abasi or Ibanez or anybody. I'm some guy on the internet who likes guitars, as you can see. I do the casual online thing. I make music, I put it on the internet. I played in bands like over 10 years ago or something, but I'm just doing this from home now. So I'm not like a virtuoso or in some amazing touring band or anything. So if you're looking for a super pro opinion, I can't give that, but if you're looking for a more like casual opinion, I can offer that. So, and also I do use a lot of like drop tunings and extended range guitars in the songs I make. So I have some experience with these, so I can give you like some of my experiences. I'm going to be discussing guitars that have like more than 6 strings, but you know, not like the 12 string thing. More like, you know, like the lower notes, like the 7 strings, the 8 strings, things like that. I will mention things about like baritone 6s too, but basically like those guitars with scale lengths longer than 25.5 inches. What I'm not doing is I'm not reviewing these guitars. So I do have reviews of these guitars on my channel, so you can go check those out, but we're talking about just like extended range in general here. All right, so why extended range? Why go through this? Why would you even get this many strings? Well, simply put, there's no substitute for hitting that super low string. Like, you know, when you were learning guitar and you first tried drop D, how you felt when you hit that low D note? It's basically that. And also certain styles of music will need these lower notes too. The first thing that comes to mind is, of course, my favorite, like metal, heavy metal, stuff like that. Lots of subgenres of metal do need these lower notes. But there's also other genres too, like jazz. Of course, there's like rock, etc. Maybe you could even play blues and hit those low notes too. Of course, there are tricks to get lower sounding tones on 6 strings, like if you do the inverted power chord, the 4th, where you've got the root note on the higher string and then your 5th is an octave down. Especially if you palm mute that, that's gonna sound like the lower note. But it won't sound exactly like hitting that lower note. It'll always sound more like a palm muted power chord, but like lower. If that makes any sense, give it a try. And so of course, with more strings, you have access to those lower notes without having to severely downtune your higher strings. Because of that, you only have to learn playing guitar with an extra string instead of having to learn a lower different tuning, because that can really throw you off. Because of that, you won't need like multiple guitars, like one tuned lower, one in a higher tuning for like different songs. You could have just one and have access to all the notes you need. There's kind of a caveat on that, but I'll get to that like soon. And of course you have the extra string or strings if you need them, but you don't have to play them for every song. Like you could go through a whole song and play just like what, the top 2, top 3, whatever strings, not even touch the lower strings. How many songs do you have on like a 6 string where you don't use all the strings? Maybe you use them every song, maybe you don't. Really depends on like what other instruments are playing, what other frequencies are being hit, etc. And of course on baritone 6 strings, you still have the similar playing field, like the neck width as a typical 6 string. Another advantage of extended range guitars with more strings is, of course, more strings, wider neck. So typically they come with thinner, wider necks. So if you like the feel of playing those, then these are going to feel great. A lot of extended range guitars, like with more strings, and obviously the baritone guitars too, will have longer scale lengths. And this is so that you can get better intonation of the lower strings. And there are plenty of advantages to that. Of course, you get the intonation like I just mentioned, but because the frets will be further apart, then playing up high is going to be easier too, because these higher frets aren't going to be as squished together. So if you like playing up high a lot, then you could consider that. There's also a compromise to that. There's multiscale extended range guitars. The lower strings will have a longer scale length, but the more treble side strings will start to go towards the standard. That way it will be easier to do things like bends and playing fast things without having to stretch too much on the treble strings. And then you have the better intonation down low where you need it. And of course that also means better tension too. And better tension helps to combat pitch drift. All right, well, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Let's talk about the drawbacks, why you wouldn't want to get an extended range guitar, because so far it sounds pretty good, right? But there are some things that make these not so fun to play. I just talked about the necks being like thin and wide. Well, if you don't like thin necks, like if you like a rounder neck to really wrap your thumb around and like bend into, stuff like that, you're not gonna like these because they're wider, thinner necks. You have to basically play thumb behind the neck And if that's not your cup of tea, which is fair, you know, we all have different playing styles, then you'll have to really think about that before you reach for one of these. Also, some songs may not be possible to play on an extended range guitar that would be possible to play on, for example, a downtuned 6-string. So if I'm playing in like drop C and I've got a lot of open string stuff that's really fast, and I'm hitting a lot of those like open strings real quickly, that's going to be extremely difficult to do, if not impossible, on an extended range guitar that doesn't have those open strings available. So hitting the low C on the 6th string of a drop C guitar like this one is going to be really easy to do. But then on the 8th string here, trying to hit that C on the 7th string here on the 3rd fret, because I'm a whole step down, like real quick, and then hitting other notes, that's going to be a whole lot harder. Like trying to do that live, I don't think I'm good enough to do that. You know, more strings is also going to take more thought to play. Like if I'm playing something and I look down at the strings, it's like, whoa, where am I? You have to get used to how many strings there are. It might sound kind of silly, but honestly, like I've taken this guitar, for example, to some jam band practices, stuff like that, and they were all playing like 6-string stuff, and I would have to like look down and like think sometimes, and I'd get kind of lost. It just made things a whole lot more difficult. Again, I'm not like some supercomputer virtuoso or anything, but you might have to think about that. And then in the same like line of thought, the multiscale, which does allow for a more standard scale length up high and longer scale length down low, because they slant depending on where the parallel fret is. You might be looking down like up on these higher frets, but because it bends away, when you look at the fret marker, you know, on the top of the neck, it's actually going to be in a different place, like here, for example, than where you actually have to hit the string if you're playing up here is going to be. So that's also going to be very confusing. You're going to have to slouch down a bit more to look at the actual fretboard. I mean, if you're already like slouching over your guitar a lot, that might not be an issue. But if you are more used to looking at the top fret markers, then you might run into trouble when trying to learn a multiscale guitar. And so overall, it is gonna feel like when you're playing like the 8th string or even the 7th string, it does feel like a different instrument than a 6-string guitar that plays like a guitar, if that makes sense. They feel like different instruments. And it's not just the feeling too, there's also like physics and math involved. So like beating or like acoustic beating, when you have lower notes and you're trying to play chords, if the notes and the chords are closer together, you're going to get more dissonance down low, versus when you're playing chords up high, it's going to sound nice. So like if you try to play a third on the lowest strings, it's going to sound pretty muddy and awful. But if you're playing like an octave or like even single notes, that's going to sound really good. So power chords are like kind of straddling the edge of does it sound good? Maybe. I guess it depends how in tune you are, your intonation, you know, your guitar tone, things like that. But it can be dubious. And also the lower strings will pitch drift more. You know, when you hit the lowest string on your guitar and it goes sharp for a little bit, well, that effect is even stronger on extended range guitar strings like the 7th to 8th string. So when you're hitting that 8th string especially, you gotta hit it not too hard because it'll like pitch drift out, but you can't hit it too weak or else it'll sound weak. And of course, there is special hardware to help get around that, like the Evertune. You know, the Evertune isn't magic, but what it is good at is holding the strings in tune. So when you hit the lowest string on an Evertune equipped guitar, it doesn't pitch drift. Of course, because the Evertune is a complex mechanical system, it does change the feel of playing the guitar. So if you don't like the feel of playing against like a spring per string on your guitar, you know, that's not gonna be right for you. Of course, we prefer different like playing feels. Some of us have more tolerance for playing things we don't like the feel of than others. You know, that's just fine. That's how it is. But the point is, while there are solutions, it might not be right or good for everyone. Because, you know, these are tools to get music made, you know, to get our jobs done. But if these tools are making our life miserable, if we really hate playing them, we're going to really hate our job, you know? And of course, the super low notes, they do kind of clash with the bass. Like this A string, I have like tuned down a whole step just because it's pretty useful to have that low E. But that low E is the same E as a standard tuned 4-string bass. So you really got to think about when you're hitting that E. Of course, it sounds a bit different because it's like played through a guitar, and that's fed through a guitar amp, not a bass amp. So it is going to sound a bit more like a guitar, but it still has that low frequency. So you got to like change your guitar tune, stuff like that. You know, and then with baritone sixes, it is going to be a 6-string, but it is going to have the longer scale length. And with longer scale length, you'll see the notes are further apart than with the standard scale length. So that means you're going to need bigger stretches to hit some things. And if you're not warmed up to stretch, if you're not used to stretching, you know, you might end up actually hurting your hand. And finally, tuning ultra low at some point is just going to make inaudible clangs. Like, the ear can only hear a certain frequency, you know, like that 20 hertz. But as you approach that, it's going to just sound really low and ridiculous. I mean, you know, there's a lot of styles of music like metal that do use that, and they use it maybe like more of a percussive thing or something like that. And if you're into that, that's cool. You know, it's fun to jam out, hang loose, things like that. So you got to ask yourself if the style of music you're playing really needs that. If you really need the extra string, the wider neck, more strings to like work on your muting technique, etc. All right, so what are my preferences and experiences? You know, I bought these guitars. I've used these guitars in songs, you know, songs on Spotify, stuff like that, music videos on YouTube. What have I learned? What can I tell you? Well, first of all, despite all the challenges I've listed, these guitars are usable. For example, the background music for this video was made all with this guitar. And it's not like super low-tuned metal fall stuff. It's just regular guitar music. So for me, 6 strings are always going to feel like home. It has the right width neck, has the right number of strings. You know, they're spaced apart nicely, not too close, not too far. The guitar's not too big or ridiculous. I can hit most all notes I need with the tuning I'm using. You know, I'm using drop C. I use the 7 strings if the song calls for it. If I need the notes lower than that low C on the drop C guitar, you know, I might need like a half step, whole step below the C, you know, like the minor scale, you know, that minor 7th is a whole step below the C. So if I want to hit that and I want it to have like that low impact, I'm going to need lower tuning, which is better on the 7 string, or a baritone 6 string. And of course, my 7th strings I do tune them down a whole string to the A. I find the A really useful. There seems to be a lot of songs out there where, like, you know, the standard tuning of a 7 does hit that B note, but I find having that A just comes in handy in a lot of songs. And then if I really need to go super lower, if I want to make just a super low, like, metal song or something, I do have the 8th string. If I want to go lower than that A, like I mentioned, I do have this a whole step down to E. And by the way, a big reason why I have these also a whole step down is because my 6-string guitars are on drop C. So that is a whole step down, and then you do the lower string down another whole step. So basically the top 5 strings on these guitars are just like the strings on my 6 strings. A lot less thinking there. But I also find that mixing like these super low notes, like on this 8th string and stuff, starts to get a bit difficult. Like, you can't use the guitar tones you're using on your 6 strings because the notes are so low. You need to kind of adjust it, take out maybe some mids, maybe some bass, a lot of bass, so you don't step on the toes of the bass. You don't want it to get all muddy and lost. Definitely need to go for a much more modern tone if you're like doing that kind of thing. And then pitch drift starts to be a big factor, especially on the 8th string. You know, you hit it really hard, it does go pretty out of tune. Even if you play softer, you gotta watch out for it. If I was gonna buy another 8th string, I don't really use 8 strings that often, so I don't need another 8th string. But if I was gonna buy another 8th string, I would just go ahead, get one with an Evertune, because the pitch drift has been a problem before when I'm trying to record, and I just need to keep doing takes, not because I messed up, but just because I hit it just a little too hard. So overall, do you need an extended range guitar? Well, if you need to hit those low notes, if the songs you're doing calls for that, the genre of music you're doing calls for that, then yes, there's no substitute for hitting those low notes. You can't really do any tricks on a 6 string. Maybe at best you can get kind of close, but it's not even a comparison. Hitting that low note is hitting that low note. But if you don't need to hit those notes, then don't put yourself through the trouble. You know, you're always going to have extra strings in the way. You're going to have to change your muting technique because the bridge will either be slanted or it'll just have more strings on it. There's always going to be another string you have to look down and like think about if you get lost. You're basically learning another new instrument. Or for a baritone 6, you know, it is still a 6 string, but the tuning is different and the frets are farther apart. So to conclude, I'd say the extended range is necessary if the music you're doing, the music you're writing or covering calls for that. But if it doesn't, or if you need like a 6-string tuning to hit some notes that are easier to hit than on an extended range guitar, then don't go through the trouble of getting extended range. Maybe stick to the 6 string. So there you have it. Did I leave anything out? Do you have any questions or comments? Were there things you liked? Were there things you disliked? Leave a comment down below. You know, this is YouTube. I have to say the YouTube thing. So like, comment, subscribe, share the video, print out every frame and mail it. And as always, peace.